Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kathleen and I'm so excited for you to be here today because today I'm doing a very exciting video. I am doing a comparison between the Huda Beauty Mauve Obsessions palette versus the Bad Habit After Hours palette. So today I want to compare both of these palettes. I'm going to do one palette on one eye and the other palette on the other eye, and I'm going to see how they apply. Hopefully they will look the same because I have to go to work later and I'm going to be wearing this look to work as long as it doesn't come out crazy. So first I want to do some swatches and I want to show you the palettes. So this is the Huda Beauty Mauve Obsessions palette. She came out with 4 different palettes and they all have different color schemes, and they're tiny palettes but they actually have 9 shades in them and they're so beautiful. I love these palettes. The quality is amazing and the pigmentation is definitely there for sure. So this is what the Mauve Obsessions palette looks like. Honestly, it's so gorgeous. These are my colors. I love some pink eyeshadow. So that's what that looks like. And then the Bad Habit counterpart is the After Hours palette. And they came out with 4 palettes as well. And this is what the After Hours palette looks like. It's slightly larger than the Huda Beauty one, but honestly, it's nothing like drastic. You could still travel with this if you wanted to. And as you can see there, the eyeshadows look almost identical to the ones in the Mauve Obsessions palette. The only difference that I'm seeing in these 2 palettes, in the Mauve Obsessions palette, this one is kind of more of a purpley brown shade. And then in the Bad Habit one, it's more of just a straight brown. If you can see that, compare the 2. If you can tell. And I'll do swatches as well. All right, I know that was a long intro, but before we get started, I would love to have you join the family. So if you want to hit that subscribe button, I would be absolutely thrilled to have you. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into some swatches. So for these swatches, I'm going to be swatching both palettes on my arm, and I'm going to be doing the Mauve Obsessions palette on top and then the After Hours palette underneath, and we are going to compare all of the different shades and see how similar they are and how pigmented they are compared to the Huda Beauty palette. Okay, so here are the swatches, and I'm trying to like move so you can see them. So as I thought, this deep purple shade from the Mauve Obsessions palette is definitely more purple than the one from the Bad Habit palette. The Bad Habit one is very just brown, and this one is more purpley, so that's something to keep in mind. But other than that, the shades match up really well. So $27 versus $10. We will see how they perform on the eyes. I'll be putting the Huda Beauty Mauve Obsessions on this eye, and then the Bad Habit After Hours on this eye. So hopefully I don't get them mixed up. So first I'm going to go in with my Smashbox 24-Hour Eyeshadow Primer. I've really been loving this primer. Normally I use the Milani one or the Hard Candy one, and those ones are great options for drugstore. They're a lot cheaper than this one. But I had a little, I think this is a sample size, and I wanted to go ahead and use it up. So I'm going to be going in with this first. Okay, so now starting on this eye first, I'm going to be using my Mauve Obsessions palette, and I'm going to be using this cream shade in here to set the primer and give me a smooth base to lay down the rest of the shadows. And I'm just packing that all over the lid and just setting down the primer that I laid down. Oh, and also I didn't mention, I'm going to be using the same brush on both sides, but I'm going to be using my color switch to clean them off, so that takes off all the color without them being wet or messing with the brush at all. Other side with the cream shade in the After Hours palette, which is the shade called Powder Room. So this one right here. And doing the same thing on this side. And this palette does give a lot of kick up, if you can see there on the white shadow that I just used, but the Mauve Obsessions palette does as well, so it's nothing to be really concerned about. At least fallout doesn't really bother me. I always do my eyes before I do my face. That way you can just clean up the look and get any shadow off your cheeks if it's fallen down there, and it doesn't mess up your foundation. So that is a good way to avoid that. Now we're going to go back into the Mauve Obsessions palette, and I'm going to start off with this shade in the center here, this taupey shade, and I'm going to be using that as my transition shade in the crease and a little bit above the crease. I always bring it up higher because I have hooded eyes and I want people to actually be able to see my eyeshadow. I'm going to go in with my Mauve blending brush. It's an extremely fluffy brush, and I'm just going to be putting that in the crease and blending it all over. Cleaning off my brush, I'm going to go into the After Hours counterpart, which is the shade Lustful in the center here. So far, I'm actually liking how the Bad Habit palette is blending out better than the Huda Beauty palette. If you can see that. Now this is my bad eye, if you will. It always seems to not blend as well in this little area right here. So I don't know if that's just my eye or if that's the palette, but it's just something to note. Okay, next we're going into this pink shade in the Mauve Obsessions palette, and I'm going to be placing that on the inner and outer corners of my eye to start creating that halo eye. And for that, I'm going to be taking my Luxie 205 tapered blending brush. Now I'm wanting to blend out the edges a little bit more, so I'm going to go back in with my Mauve brush, and I'm going to use that taupe shade again and just blend out the edges of that very, very lightly. And doing the same thing on this eye with the After Hours palette, and I'm using the shade Flushed in this palette. I'm noticing that this shade is just slightly less pigmented than the one in the Mauve Obsessions palette, but it's nothing too difficult. You just have to build it up a little bit more. But it's blending out nicely. And because I used the taupey shade from the Mauve Obsessions palette to blend out the edges, I'm going to do the same thing in this palette. Now I'm going to be taking this really bright berry shade, and I'm going to be doing the same thing that I did with the pink shade, except more precise, and I'm just going to be deepening up that color. For this, you want to use a small brush and be very careful because it can get blown out really quickly. So I am using my Luxie 121 mini tapered blending brush, and I'm going to be using that for the outer corners, and then because the inner corner of my eye is such a small space, I'm going to be using the Luxie 237 blending brush for the inner corners of my eyes, which is even smaller than the one I'm going to be using for the outer corners. Very lightly tapping that into the color and then slowly building that color up. And I'm using the same technique that I did with the pink one, just putting it on the inner and outer corners of my eye and bringing it up into the crease. Okay, and doing the same thing on this side with the shade Cabernet from the After Hours palette. Honestly, so far they're looking exactly the same, and I'm really glad because I was a little bit nervous. So I think that before I go ahead and cut my crease, I'm going to use a little bit of the really deep berry shade in the palette to just deepen up the outer corner just a tiny bit to give it a little bit more depth. For that, I'm going to be using my Luxie 229 tapered blending brush for that. And the counterpart to that shade in the After Hours palette is the shade Hickey. Right there. Okay, now on to one of my favorite parts of this eye look, but also the most difficult part of the eye look. I'm going to be cutting out just the center of my lid using some concealer, and that's going to give it the illusion that I have a much bigger eyelid, and it's going to help the shimmer shade that I place on top of it pop really, really nicely. So to cut out my crease, I'm going to be using my Tarte Shape Tape Concealer, as well as my favorite brush to use to cut out my crease, which is the Wet n Wild Concealer brush. This is like the perfect brush. It's so tiny and it's a little bit stiff, so you can really get the perfect line that you need when you're doing a cut crease. And it's only 99 cents, so nothing can really beat this. And I'm going to be just cutting out the center of my lid, making it a little bit wider at the top and then bringing it down. And for me, since I have hooded eyes, again, I go a little bit above my crease. That way I won't get any transfer of the concealer or glitter up into my crease where I don't want it. And the trick for cutting out your crease is just really taking your time, going slow and not using too much concealer because it can get really messy really quickly. Okay, one side is done. It's definitely not perfect. It's a little bit wider than I wanted it to be, but it's fine. We're just gonna move on and try to match the other eye to this eye. Okay. See, this one is more, I wanted it to be like thicker on the top and then go down into a little bit of a V, and I didn't really get that on that one, but I think it's probably good enough. I might fix it just a little bit more. Okay, I think that's good. I'm gonna stop messing with it. It's not perfect, but I think it'll look better once I have the shimmer shade on top. So now for my favorite part, I'm going to be using this shade in the Mauve Obsessions palette here, and I'm going to be placing that all over the concealer that I put on my eye. And to put that shimmer shade on, I'm going to be using my favorite brush of all time, the Bodyography Pro brush, and this is just the flat shader brush by them. I would not be able to survive without this brush. It can make any shimmer shade look gorgeous, no matter how chunky the shimmer shade is or how sheer it is. If you just pack it on using this brush, looks amazing. I highly recommend it. Oh my gosh, that concealer just makes the shimmer shade pop and it looks so gorgeous. This technique is also really good if you have a shimmer shade that has really good potential, but it's not showing up just putting it on regular. If you put concealer or glitter glue underneath that shade, it just looks gorgeous. It is an extra step that takes extra time, but I definitely think it's worth it for some shimmer shades. Okay, one eye down, one eye to go. The matching shade and the After Hours palette is the shade Clutch right here. I'm a little worried that this one isn't going to show up as much as the Huda side, but we shall see. Oh yeah, that is gorgeous. It looks perfect. It's pretty much spot on to the Huda one. Wow. Wow. Guys, $10. $10 for this, and it looks pretty much identical to this side. My mind is blown right now. Honestly, this shade in the After Hours palette isn't as chunky as the one in the Mauve Obsession, so I think it's a little bit easier to work with, honestly. Yeah, so that one took me like half the time to apply that this one did, because this one is just more chunky and it takes more packing on and building up to get it to where I wanted it to be. But this one was perfect in like one swipe. I'm really loving how this is turning out. They are slightly uneven, but it's fine. It's the perfectionist in me is like going crazy right now, but honestly it's fine. Once I put my lashes on, I'll be fine. Okay, so now I think that is all for the upper part of my eye. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of my face off camera, and then I will be back to finish up the eyes, do my lower lash line, and apply lashes. And then I will give my final thoughts on these two palettes. Okay, I'm back. I finished up my face, and I'm really liking how it turned out. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish up the eyes. I'm going to use this pink shade here from the Mauve Obsessions palette. With a pencil brush, this is the Morphe MB18 pencil brush. I'm just going to smoke that pink on the lower lash line. Doing the same thing with Flushed on this side. Taking my Crown Brush C513 pencil brush, I'm going to be going into that deep berry shade and darkening up the lower lash line. The shade that I'm going to be using on this eye is Cabernet from the After Hours palette. And lastly, I'm going to be taking this pinky shade again and just using that to highlight my inner corners. And then for the After Hours palette, the shade Clutch. Okay, yeah, now that I'm using the shade Clutch in the inner corner, I'm definitely liking this one better than the one in the Huda palette. So now I'm going to apply my liner and lashes off camera, and I will be back for my final thoughts. Okay guys, this is the finished look using the Huda Beauty Mauve Obsessions palette on this eye and the Bad Habit After Hours palette on this eye. I am so happy with how this turned out. It looks so good in my opinion, and honestly, comparing the two, I think that the After Hours palette actually turned out better on this side than the Mauve Obsessions palette. I mean, it's very, very minor. Both of them look pretty similar, but the way that the After Hours palette blended out and the way that it performed, in my opinion, for $10 is much better than paying $27 for the Mauve Obsessions palette. Oh, also, if you're wondering, I'm wearing the Lily Lashes for Sephora collection on my eyes, and they are pretty dramatic. I got them on sale yesterday at TJ Maxx. I think they're like $7.99, and I was really excited about that. So I'm testing them out, seeing how they go today at work. So yeah, overall, I am obsessed with this palette. It is beautiful and I love it. And if you have this palette, You definitely don't need the Bad Habit one, but if you don't have this palette, or if you're interested in any of the other color stories that Huda has in the Obsessions line, then I strongly recommend checking out the Bad Habit ones on the Hush app. This palette is amazing. It performs extremely well. It performs just like, if not better than this one. And it's only $10. So yeah, I think that about sums it up. Let me know in the comments below which side you like better and which side you think looks better and perform better on the eyes. The Mauve Obsession side or the After Hours side. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this type of content, beauty-related content and makeup tutorials, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would be so grateful if you did. And again, thank you all so much, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye!